Thanks for that, Mark. And, I think the buyer was just a very tired economist. So I think that coffee's well and truly, run out at this point, and I'm sure for all of you. So hopefully we can get through it. So as Mark says, I'm involved in quite a few land and water projects. So, massive shout out and thanks to land and water for putting my daughter through college. That's really doing the legwork and keeping a roof over their head and all that sort of thing. But as a result, there's so many projects. After the last one, I did a project talking about disease risk changing with climate change and how that affects horticulture. So great with all fancy graphs and big, wonderful hitting outputs. Oh yeah, of course, Mark, I'll come present that. Reads the flyer a little later than he should have. Oh, it's the land use change project. Shit, bollocks. But, however, I thought I can't let Woodsy down, so I've managed to get together the integrated assessment framework talk. So this is going to be on that issue particularly. So we made it out in the end to get the right one. So big thanks to the team. Bloody hell, big, that's full energy, isn't it? So big thanks to all the co-authors on the project from the AEIU and of course National Science Challenge. So yeah, thanks again. Good stuff. And why is this a problem? Why are we interested? Well, everyone today's done the work for me. There's so many issues that we're now facing that involve land use change, and we've got restrictions, legislation coming through, different pressures on our agricultural spaces that are going, at what point are we going to have to actually bite the bullet and see, encourage land use ourselves, or as Kenny showed, maybe that will be done for us with economic sort of drivers. But, how can we be ready to, how can we be informed about these and know what the result's going to be ahead of time to see if we do want to encourage these things? So that's the problem. Personally, I have another problem. One is that we want to be able to look at this across more dimensions than just economics. I'm an economist. You're welcome. That's, me taking a different slide, try and, exercise the collective sins as all economists and, collective guilt we've got under it all. But we want to look at these other indicators. And of course, there's been a lot of talk today about some of the environmental ones, but we want to go broader. We want to go broader to all these different things these land use changes can affect, and to social indicators as well. To have good lives for the people of New Zealand isn't just raising incomes, which is, of course, a really important part, but making sure there's other forms of the well-being. There's environmental factors we want to include. There's social factors we want to include. And we want people to be aware of these and our decision makers to be thinking about these. So that's one of my problems. The other problem I have, this is the blurb that Woodsy sent out on the flyer for everyone. Feel like being a god for the day. No, I've got to present and somehow make you all feel like divine beings. I think it's a big shout. And then he's introduced me as Ben Elton. It's like, yeah, here's a funny economist. It's a very low bar. That's not anything to advertise. Fairly a dry profession. So I'm going to try my very best to make you all feel like gods for the day. So, of course, how do we approach these problems, these decision-making challenges for our decision makers, et cetera, et cetera? Models, of course, we've all seen our models. But Kenny says my models are wrong. Really, this vicious attack on models and them all being crap. And, Richard says they're uncertain. Well, I'm uncertain, let alone my models are uncertain. So often I find it's when we have a model, it's because it's been designed for a specific purpose. And often it can be quite good at giving us information about that purpose, and very bad when it's put to other purposes. So if anyone is familiar with Overseer, that's a great example of it going right and only being used for the things it was designed for and only good outcomes. So we're all familiar with that. So how do we deal with this in a model? Well, I say stuff it. I'm not going to play. I'm going to take my ball and go home. I'm not going to do a model, and thus you can't criticize on how bad or good it is. Instead, we're doing a framework. So luckily, again, introduced the idea of just a tool so people can play around with these scenarios and start to test some of the ideas going ahead. So really the motivation, what was our case? What did we want to do this for, to sort of set our parameters? Well, it was really regional and district councils. So you had people at that sort of level who were, asked to make these decisions, asked to think about their consequences. But often they'd be really amazing, fancy, complex, brilliant tools. And, Kenny's produced some really heavy lifting sort of scientific stuff that can give us these fantastic answers. But often for policymakers, they didn't have the skills to be able to access that. They'd have a lot of staff turnover, that they had new people coming through who didn't have time to engage with these. So often they were getting left to the side, or they didn't have the resources to do the brilliant analysis of the sort Kenny does. So there was a lot of these limitations for what they actually had access and would actually use. So there was a real gap there. And also, we had this thing about, what about these other dimensions? Often they couldn't really key into this. So their tools just had no pathway implementations for assessing land use changes. So that was a big gap we want to address. And I'm so thankful to be here in a room and an audience of only district and regional councillors, that you're all from there, you're all the analysis there. So this is super relevant to every and each and one of you, because I know I've been told that's the audience I'm speaking to. Yeah, all the regional councils or district now. Oh, bollocks. In which case, well, anyone making decision-making or thinking about how you might change a region or district might be able to see why this is useful, or to have a play around and see your sort of prospective futures of what would be good changes or use. And, it's really that trade-off between complexity and simplicity. And this is very much towards the simple side. And I could make a joke about that's where regional council's thinking's at, is the very simple side, but I won't. I'm not going to, in respect to my audience, of course. So this is our integrated assessment framework, easy to use, easy to engage with, and has these impacts across these 4 wellbeing spaces. So indicators. I'm going to just rattle through some slides quickly. There's a lot of indicators out there. And so indicators are obviously just a simple way of understanding something out there in the world. And so there's a bunch of different ones. So New Zealand Treasury has this wonderful graph showing, across natural environment, social cohesion, financial and physical capital. So you have usually what we think of in economics, human capability and culture sort of underpinning it all. And you can see you break it down into who it affects, so firms compared to whānau, hapu and iwi, family and households, then you really get to the indicators, the specific indicators, that how you track the sort of country's health in these 4 main categories. All right? And so there's a lot of them. That we have a lot of different ones out there. So the New Zealand Living Standard Framework is the one the Treasury is using to try and think more broadly about what it is to have a successful and happy Aotearoa. We can all be, happy chums going around. And then internationally, there's some as well. So the Sustainable Development Goals. The OECD has a wellbeing framework. So how we track how countries are doing, not just looking at GDP and saying, are you rich or not? Are you rich? Yeah, you must be doing right, which we know is kind of true. We know, usually, if you're rich, you have access to a lot of things, can make your own life better in a lot of ways. But there's a lot of other things. Sense of community. Are you a really lonely rich guy? If anyone starts crying, it's all right, we're here for you. You could just give us some of those dollars and we'll really support you, But so there's a lot of different ways we can think about this and a lot of different frameworks for thinking about this internationally. So we'll just blitz through this. I think we're all too tired. I know I'm definitely too tired. But just to say, there are examples in New Zealand of people thinking along these lines and trying to get measurable sort of ways we can judge these so we can actually have something we can track over time. So you can ask questions all day long about these if you want a bit more detail. So here's a summation on 3 of these categories. So economics. Here's some existing wellbeing indicators for economic wellbeing in New Zealand, which there is data for. So we know there's stuff out there. Now, there was a guy that worked with us, Simon Duff, who had to go and do the literature review and get all of this sort of data. And he was very fastidious, trailing through this thing. But the thing he was doing for his PhD at the same time was talking to these social enterprises, so companies that do social good for the community. And one in particular, he was interviewing people who were sort of ex-convicts that had been hired and, how's your well-being after this? And he said he went up to one really tough look guy, hi, and he's very mild man, hi, could I, interview you for how your well-being is doing? And the guy just told him to F off. And no one started to do that. I'll put you down as a maybe then, mate. So thank you so much to Simon for doing all this work of tracking these wellbeing indicators and talking to the gruff side of some of these businesses. And so a lot of these we've talked about, and a lot of these you'll be dealing with a lot, is environmental indicators. And so just to say there is data, and of course the LAWA platform was talked about here. And so we do have data on a lot of these things, so we can start tracking them over time and start integrating them into some way of thinking about not just economic change. And then social well-being gets a bit more difficult, gets a bit more fluffy. So how you actually have a measurable indicator for these is a bit harder. But here's some things we sort of brought together that might start to express how your community is doing. Are you doing well? Do you have access to basic amenities? Social connectedness, so that's sometimes self-reported. You go and survey people. Overall life satisfaction, future expectations. So we do have ways and methodologies of finding out from people, are you doing all right? Is this community healthy? And so we can think about the health of our regions and communities, environmentally, economically, and, well, hopefully, socially. All right, so you've got all these bloody, I'm drowning in indicators. Thank you, Simon, for doing the work, but that's too many indicators to do anything. How do we put these into a framework? Well, we talked to 2 regional councils, or 1 regional council, 1 district council, Ashburton and Mosgiel, to set up and try and make it useful for them. They asked us to do 2 scenarios to start. One looking at nitrate limits, so land use change to address nitrate limits in Ashburton, and the other peri-urban expansion. So problem around New Zealand, or problem quote unquote, but something that's affecting land use change, and we're seeing some of our really productive landscapes going into urban expansion. So how can we have a single framework that can have that giant list of indicators and somehow make it work? So we started, okay, we've got sort of peri-urban expansion, and maybe that goes land fragmentation, land use change, to GDP. And then the GDP, that has an effect on your farm types, your production, and it goes to the employment rate, and you sort of get your head around it, right? And then you go, well, the environmental also, no, follow me. Water quality, no. River stream, which links to, no. Okay. No. Okay, and then social comes on, and that's aligned to highest, which links to, and then the economic. So you've got 17 categories up here. You've got 4 that come under here. And the key thing you want to look at here is the farm classes here. Well, they interlink with your GDP and your land use over there. And that all ties together to give you so it was quite hard to think of a way we could link together all these different indicators and have a framework which summed them all up and captured the interlinkages between them, because it's not just as simple as one thing does another thing. So we made a nice little graph that tried to codify the relationships and interdependencies of these, to have her just sit back and think about how all these things might be interrelated. And even that's quite complex, but at least it gave us an idea of where to go from. So then the idea is we're interested in land use change and how that might kick things down this chain of interconnected, linked things. So here we go. Here's beautiful. We put in some color so you wouldn't be too bored and would find it really engaging. But these are the final sort of indicators we thought had a fair enough data out there to say they were measurable over time so we could track them. And also we could see a link to land use change and GDP. And then we did nice little flow charts that show how land use change might filter down. So land use change, of course, changes your production and revenue in your region, changes your total GDP, indirect and induced, so flow-on effects from that change. And that can affect your total employment rate, so that affects people's incomes in the region. It affects the job industry, and that can have flow-on effects for qualification, people in the workforce. And so you can start to see, you can construct these little flows of how you think about land use change might ripple through a region. So you capture that. Similarly, we did it for the environmental well-beings, and so tied to land use and, codifying these relationships. And it's very hard, because even if you have some of these indicators, do you know what the relationship between that indicator changing and land use changing is? Oh, bloody hell, I need to call up Simon again and try and get him to do that. So there's a real mixed bag of literature on some that there's really strong literature behind, some there's not a lot at all. And then our social well-being, so land use also can change production, land fragmentation, your population goes through employment, and that was sort of the driver we had for a lot of these social well-being indicators. All right. Is everyone asleep? Everyone tired? I know I am. Can I nap up here? Is there a small pillow or anything I can borrow? No? All right, I better continue. So this is the framework. This is what came out the other end. It's Excel-based tools, so the councils can just have it there. Very easy to jump on. Everyone's pretty familiar with Excel. It's very easy to use, and it's to give this little flow through for councils. So, of course, we said Ashburton and Otago regional districts. So they gave us these scenarios. So look, here's a nice couple of easy, this was informed by them and their thinking at the time. You'd think 50% converting to forest sounds like, 50% dairy, converting to forestry sounds massive, but that was really the changes they were considering as potential options going into this. So really simple scenarios. And to start off with, it was just the two most important places in New Zealand, which is Mosgiel and Ashburton, which, the fulcrum with which, the rest of New Zealand revolves around. So it was important we covered the main ones. But I'm happy to say we also covered the lesser districts now. So it's currently got all the different regions of New Zealand in there. But these were our case studies with our sort of stakeholders we were working with at the time. So you can here's with some basic ones just to get sort of whet the appetite going. But we also had this idea of a custom scenario. So using the land class database, a few assumptions and some data, we could sort of have your baseline, how many hectares is roughly in each different enterprise. We have updated some of these, so you can see these are just weighted evenly across different dairy classes and different sheep beef. Those have changed now. But to give you an idea, you've got sliders so you can play with. You've got a scenario here of your hectares and baseline here. So you can just go, bang, I'll slap a bit more into, I will take a bit out of dairy, we'll slap a bit more into this. And you can quite easily just either type in the amount of hectares you want in your new scenario or just change it around. So you can quite easily make your own custom bundle from, whatever plan or just to have a play around. And so there was also the problem. So we've got, here's the current classes in here. That you go region to region and someone say, this is completely unsuitable for our region. You're like, oh, okay, yeah, no, I understand its course and we're using regional, but this is completely unsuitable. Okay, well, can you tell us why and maybe we can help? Well, because in Otago, we have 4 classes of deer. Okay, well, what the hell are you doing with deer in Otago that you need 4 different classes of what you're doing? Sort of, all right, well, deer's obviously very, very important to you. So we also added in the option that you could add your own classes. If there was something that we'd missed and you were really offended that we didn't have all your specific deer classes, there is a way you can add in the data yourself and look at deer for all your Otago dreams. That's the saving grace of Otago, obviously. But the idea, it's quite quick and easy to put in your own scenarios. And then here's the dashboard that comes out the other side of it. And so you can see here, there's the classic economic stuff, nice economics. So you can see your total change. So that's your direct, your indirect and induced are kind of the flow and effects to other areas of the economy, and the effect through change in incomes is the sort of, quick and easy way to think about it. Change in employment and full-time equivalents, similarly. And then value add, the effect it has on sort of GDP, the actual additional value that is producing or not producing, as it were, compared from the base scenario to the one you've got. Now, I said about the difficulty in how we think about the change of land use affecting the change of our social and sort of environmental indicators. And in the end, the best thing we could do at this stage is just have an indicative direction of change. So we had a lot of consultation. So one, going through the literature to see where there was evidence of that, and B, talking to experts to say, can you codify, is there directional change one way or the other for, the swimming index is an obvious one, or soil quality. And so these are very, very broad, but there's a massive thing of literature behind this that you can, on the tool, go to and see what the confidence is between each of these. Say, this is essentially a guess by an expert versus, no, there's evidence, and here's the reference to the paper that says that. That the hope is that, A, it's transparent about where it's good and where it's bad, but also to highlight, to go, oh, we don't know the relationship between those things. That would be really useful for our council to help hopefully identify some of these linkages that we can dig further into later. But overall, if you're a nice policy planner, the idea is that you get your economic impacts, you get directionality of change upon some key environmental scores, directionality change on some social scores, and gives you this here of a quick, here's a list of things you should be considering. Here's a list of things your scenario is likely to make worse, likely to make better. And please, for God's sake, talk to the people who actually know what they're doing. Flagging up, talk to an expert. You've done something that will create massive difficulty. Go talk to these key people. You need to consult further for the specifics of this. So that's sort of the idea of having it all easily digestible, and then you can go into a bit further detail just with a bit of weighting on these scores. We can talk about that. Where there's some more measurable outcomes for the social environmental measures, and then also which specific industries are winners and losers in this. So, maybe it's good for some industries, maybe it's bad for others, and the flow and effects of that. 5 minutes, bloody hell. So the idea is you want people to play with it, to see what works and what doesn't work. We had a great thing, it was an online seminar, and we got a farmer to come along and play with it. And went, well, you're king of Ashburn now, mate. That's congratulations, you just got a promotion. What would you do to the place? And he goes, well, I like my environmental stuff, so take a bunch out of dairy. Yeah, get rid of the dairy, we're not interested in it. And I want it to go into, indigenous forests, parks and recreation, wetlands. Oh yeah, great, no skin off my back. I've just, showed the deal, go for it, mate. So he put those through. And this is what came out the other side. And, oh, look, wow, brilliant. You've really saved the environment, mate. Ashburn's environment's never been more lovely. But would you like to explain what you're going to do about this $100 million gap in your budget next year? And he went, that's not good. And I'm like, and what about the 200 people, maybe, 330 people who now no longer have a job in your region? And he went, maybe we could not put so much out of dairy. And what about some horticulture? All right, and we did that, and it didn't quite, but balanced the books. And what if you got a premium for some of your horticulture? What if you did some real high value and put that through? And you could see how quickly he saw the problems faced with it, some of the flow on things he hadn't thought about, but it gave him the chance to go back and say, what if this? How much of a premium would we need in, say, horticulture to match some of these deficits? And the idea of this isn't to say yes or no, but it's to give you the information. Maybe that's fine. Yeah, maybe we're fine losing that money because we care about the environment, because we have other indicators we want to go. It's just giving the opportunity to play around with. And thankfully, Oliver, you did the complete groundwork for me of saying why a tool of this type might be useful just before I got up. So good thanks to you for answering a couple of the difficult questions as well. Very nice. So this thing about making you think like a policymaker and think about trade-offs. And again, it's at the regional level. But the whole thing is also open that you can put in your own data for smaller regions. If you have better data than the things we have in there, please put it in there. It's a framework. It's easy to update. So, identify gaps in the thinking. If there's some key things that it says, look, we don't really have any confidence in there, great. You can fund an economist. Go on, do it. It'll be great fun. Yeah, it'll be great. Yeah, Kenny could do you a great bespoke thing. Yeah, but it shows you the gaps there, and hopefully that can help New Zealand science. So there's other things in there. There's things glossary to tell you what everything means, what up and down means for any indicator. A big list of references, giant list, so you can thank Simon and think of his long hours doing that. You can change all the data that goes into it. You can add your land classes, add farm classes. So you can create your own perspective, just utopia, beautiful, wonderful version of your region, or a complete disaster. But it's better that you do that in the tool first, rather than if you're a decision maker going out and doing it in the real world. So it's to give you a chance to go back and tinker. But it lets you create your own thing like a god. Yeah, see, we got there in the end. I managed to take off. I hope you all really feel empowered like gods right now. So thank you for your attention. The tool is available online to download and have a play around with yourself. We always welcome feedback and questions on running it, but it's out there just to think like a regional planner, which might be something everyone would rather not do. I'm sure. Anyway, thank you for your attention. Yeah.
If anybody wants some questions for John to help him with the new position as God?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if it's a question or a comment, but I love it that same thing as we've been trying to do is make this information available so people can actually explore scenarios for their own. One thing I was wondering is around the quantification of the environmental benefits and whether there's a bit more that we could quite easily add to this, because what I just showed is we've actually...
When I saw your one, it's like I just wanted a link there that said, if you're concerned about these, here's a model that digs a bit deeper into those.
Criticism we've got for our thing is that we are the economic cost.
Together we shall rule over everything. Let's definitely stay in touch. That's because, and again, our things are very coarse. That's per farm type, one thing for nitrates out. It's completely coarse. You can change it, obviously, if you have your own data or use case, but being able to link into a tool like yours, which goes a bit deeper, would be wonderful. Yeah.
Is it possible to consider distributional effects in economic analysis? Like a lot of stuff, it's like, oh yeah, on average it's a small change, but actually for a small part of the community, this is going to be a huge change and everyone else might not notice it. And a lot of wellbeing is about distribution. Like GDP, it's not just where it's at, but who's winning and who's losing within that.
So there's a lot of good indicators like the Gini index, which talk about inequality, and I agree that's, I think, the failing of economics, or one of talking about the collective guilt for the last long term, is everyone's been very tied to GDP per capita as, people's on average. But if you look at sort of real wages, so you have productivity going up and real wages sort of stagnating, and part of that is, of course, the owners of capital. So I'm turning communist all of a sudden. Hang on, is this turning red? No. But it's saying, the inequality really matters for communities. At the moment, we don't have anything in there at a regional level, and of course, because it's just tied to land use, it's going into the people who are obviously the producers. There are the distributional effects, so those flow-on effects to other industries. In the induced effects, it changes. So if a farmer is suddenly making a lot more money, they spend more money in the community. So I might be a barista, but suddenly I've got more income because there's more money sloshing around the economy. So it tracks that flow. So it does have some distributional impacts, but only across the different businesses in the region. But that's definitely something, in thinking about how you'd codify it, there's a lot of work on that at national scale, but to do it at regional would be really cool as well. So, yeah. There was also, this other project, the Our Land and Water one on the horticulture and disease risk. I had these in case we had a bit more time, and of course we didn't. But I was originally these are the 75,000 different names that Client Science has for botrytis. Please read the last one and make sure I'm not going crazy. I swear they're just taking the piss at this point. They got the little economist along, hey, put this name in. No, we all call botrytis that way. But I was so proud, and there was this great bit of work that went along thinking about how we think about the Maori, think about the cultural health of land, and saying we do a lot of this on our waterways, but there's not really a good framework to think about at land. And there was this great thing that, I'm as European as they come, unfortunately, speaking of collective guilt, but thinking about, well, really you've got this concept of Maori, but you've got this concept of economic and environmental well-being, and really there was a shared set of indicators underlying which spoke to both. So while it's not necessarily me having to fully understand the concept, as much as I might try, but there's still a shared set of indicators under that could do both in a sense. So really there was this wonderful report that came out of this, which I encourage everyone, that's all available to get or contact me, that goes into using these environmental and ecological measurements, please, to how we might value our land resources in New Zealand in the future. So that was an amazing report that came out of it, and some other stuff about disease risk. But I had this amazing graph. I was so happy with this and the nice colours, and I was like, this will blow their socks off. Presented earlier and better. How did you steal my Apple suitability thunder? I didn't think that was even possible. so just to say, we had some fancy pictures in there as well. But just quickly, there's also a platform here. I know it's less relevant for you guys up here, but if you're looking about horticultural disease risk, there's a platform you can go here. You can type in an exact address around the country, and it'll tell the economic costs, disease risk for apples and grapes at different regions around New Zealand. It's a really easy to use tool, and another thing that's really fun to play with for medium and long term changes under climate change. So anyway, there's a couple of other little plugs. Thanks for indulging.
Brilliant. Give you a round of applause.